Hello and welcome to our SiriusXM Town Hall here on East Street Radio. I'm Jim Rotolo. Bruce Springsteen's album Nebraska is iconic, a groundbreaking artistic choice, and now the subject of a brand new feature film from 20th Century Studios. Springsteen, Deliver Me From Nowhere will be in theaters on October 24th. Joining us today in our SiriusXM studios in New York City is the star of Springsteen, Deliver Me From Nowhere, Jeremy Allen White.
Hello, hello.
And the one and only Mr. Bruce Springsteen.
Woo-woo.
Hearing the intro, I'm not sure if it's him or me now. I can't figure it out.
Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll definitely get to that. I want to start with you, Bruce. When were you first approached about this film?
Scott Cooper and Warren Zanes, who wrote the book Deliver Me From Nowhere, came down to my house and just talked to me a little bit about the idea of doing a film. Sounded pretty good, and I said, okay.
Okay. Yeah.
That was it, you know. I believe the inception was one of our producers heard a Mark Maron podcast where he was interviewing Warren Zanes, and that was the inception of the idea of trying to do a movie about the book, you know. Mm-hmm. And Scott came down, and Scott was just... he understood the kind of picture we would want to make, you know, which was not your usual musical biopic. You know, we was more of a character-driven drama with music. You know, so he had a really good understanding of what he wanted to do with the book, and it sounded different and good to me. So that's how it got started.
Right. Right. And what about you, Jeremy? When you first heard about this project, what made you decide, I want this part, I want to play Bruce Springsteen in this film?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'd met Scott Cooper prior to knowing anything about the movie or the fact that he was, you know, doing a movie about Bruce. And I'd always been a really big fan of his, and we'd gotten together and had kind of a long talk about just movies we liked and actors we liked, and I'd always wanted to do something with Scott. He didn't bring up this movie, but I do think he was trying to kind of figure me out during this meeting, because 2 months later, he asked if I'd listened to the record Nebraska. I told him I had, and I loved it. And he said, you know, I'm going to send you something to read. And, you know, I read the script, and it was so beautifully done. And like I said, I enjoy Scott so much as a filmmaker. I was hesitant because, you know, I know how beloved Bruce is by so many, and you know, you all know this, you know, better than anyone. And I didn't want to do anything that would kind of like, you know, interrupt that relationship, you know. But I think because this story was so focused on this specific period and time, and a lot of this movie takes place with, you know, it's a man alone, you know, and it's a man looking for inspiration and finding inspiration and revisiting his past. I thought I should try, you know.
Yeah. Well, that was my next question. How much of Bruce Springsteen did you know, his music, particularly the Nebraska album?
Yeah, I mean, look, I grew up in Brooklyn in the 90s. I don't remember a time I didn't know the name Bruce Springsteen. I don't remember a time I didn't know what Bruce looked like. And I didn't remember a time where I didn't know his, I'll call him, you know, jukebox or radio songs, you know. Mm-hmm. But then it had to be in high school, and my introduction of, like, you know, first album listened to front to back was probably Born to Run, and then The River. And then in my early 20s, I think it was, what had come out? Bon Iver's first record. And there was all this kind of like lore around, you know, did he have mono and how is this made? And he went in a cabin somewhere. And I had some friends who were musicians, and they were telling me about Bruce Springsteen's record of Nebraska, because there was a similar lore, you know, around it, and the fact that, you know, Bruce made it on his own. And, you know, today's age, it's fairly common for an artist to make a record alone in a hotel room, bedroom, whatever it is. But it was pretty far out, you know, when Bruce did it. And so So the first time I listened to that record was probably in my early 20s, and I loved it. But you know, I'd put it down, and I didn't know. I didn't know how well I would come to really understand it in the future. Yeah.
You answered every question, that question that every Bruce Springsteen fan wanted to know, which was your introduction into Bruce, into that world, into Nebraska. But you decided to go after this role. It seemed like the right thing for you to do, considering that you did not know how to play an instrument, or you weren't a singer, or much of a singer, or no singing background.
Yeah, I'm a dummy. Yeah. I did. I remember telling Scott, you know, I love Bruce. The story here is so rich. I think I could give something to it, and I think I have an understanding of what Bruce was going on in this period, and you know, I think we're dealing with a man who's kind of looking over the edge at times, and you know, I think I know what that view looks like, and so I knew I could try to at least deliver on that much, but. You know, I told him, are you sure you don't want to hire somebody who kind of, you know, already checks the boxes of the guitar and singing and stuff like that?
Yeah, because when we first heard about this film, I think the big question amongst the Bruce Springsteen fans was, well, who's going to play Bruce? Who could that be? You know, and people started naming singers from bands and guitar players and stuff.
Naturally, yeah.
I think they made the right choice.
Oh, appreciate it. That's very kind. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
For you, Bruce, was there any hesitation in someone else telling this very private story of your life?
Not really. It was an interesting period. You know, it was a period where I confronted a lot of. I think up until my early 30s, I was coasting on music being the way I self-medicated myself. You know, for my anxieties and different depressions, and worked fine all through my 20s, you know, the road, the band, the music, kind of kept me afloat. But some strange thing happened in my early 30s where I hit a wall, and suddenly those things weren't simply not as functional as they once were. And I got into a situation where somebody says, well, you know, you have 3 hours on stage. What are you going to do with the other 21? You know, and I had figured that part out. You know, I knew what I was doing for 3 hours, but for the other 21 hours, I was usually pretty lost. You know, so the book that Warren Zanes wrote was very good. We knew we were going to have to expand it from just being about the making of the record itself, and so we sort of moved into aspects of my memoir, you know, where that would flesh out the psychological part of the story that occurred when I was just Jeremy's age, you know, 31 and 32, my own kid's age now, you know. So I had my daughter with me last night, and I says, look, you know, this was me when I was exactly your age, you know. And your kids, they don't know much about your life before them, you know. So it was fascinating watching it with her, and it was quite wonderful. And I want to add that Jeremy was my first and only choice for the picture right from the start, you know. I'd seen him on The Bear, and I knew he had the inner psychology. The camera read his state of mind, you know, and there was something about the way he physically moved, and that just immediately when it came up, you know, he was my first choice. And so when Scott said he was interested, I was like, oh wow, that's fantastic, you know, and so it's been a great pleasure for me to have him do the job in the film.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, that he did. What did I have to ask? What did your daughter think of the film? Or think of you watching you on the screen, but it's played by Jeremy Allen White?
Oh, she was fascinated by it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, to see your father's life before you were there is a strange thing for your children, you know. But she loved it. She really enjoyed it.
So we have some questions from members of the East Street Nation, so we're going to have them fire away at you. You ready for this?
Yeah.
Sure.
All right. So first up, we have Alex Bruvansky. Alex, hi.
Hi, how you doing? Hi, Jeremy.
Good.
Hi, Bruce. This is
Hi.
so cool to be here. Thank you so much. My question is for Jeremy. What was the most difficult part of trying to sing Bruce's iconic songs?
You know, it's funny. In the beginning, I was so focused on trying to sound exactly like Bruce that I forgot something that should have come very naturally, you know, to an actor, which is kind of what are you singing about? You know, how can you internalize this? Where do you see yourself in here? And so in the beginning, I found it hard because I was just so focused on kind of the finished product, I guess. And I worked with this really wonderful coach, this guy, Eric Vitro, who works with you know, young actors that have done films like this, but also really great singers. And he started slowing me down, and he was like, you know, just try and sing this song like it's your own. Write it down 100 times. Really try to get familiar. We'll try to sound more like Bruce, you know, going forward. But if you can make this honest, people will hear it and they'll connect with it, even if you don't sound just like the man. And so, funnily enough, that was the difficult part of the journey, was kind of trying to find myself in the music, and then sounding like Bruce, or trying to sound as much as I could like Bruce. That, you know, that came later.
But I think that's why your performance is so powerful and believable, is that rather than trying to imitate the sound of my voice or imitate the way that I did one thing or another, you know, you really internalized my psychology, and, you know, you were the perfect combination of just naturally yourself, while you had sort of internalize the essential elements of what you'd need to do the performance. You know, it was really just some great choices you made.
Thank you. And it's like, you know, it's the same as, you know, it's easy to turn in a great performance when the writing of a film is really great, and there's no better writing than, you know, than Bruce Springsteen, and especially in Nebraska. And so, you know, to find that honesty, it was, you know, it wasn't too tough.
Yeah, I like to follow up with that, because Bruce has such a specific physicality and presence. You know, where is that line where you're trying to capture that without it looking or slipping into imitation?
Yeah, I mean, Bruce, you're just so well known. It's like, it's tough. Everybody's familiar, you know. Everybody's familiar with Bruce's voice, and that even just sort of silhouette of Bruce Springsteen, you know. And so, you know, I knew I had a lot of footage. I had a lot to watch, a lot of interviews, a lot of especially kind of concert footage. I was trying to focus on that period of kind of like the late 70s and early 80s, and find Bruce around that period, around the age of 31. And yeah, you know, I mean, I watched as much as I could, and I listened to as much as I could, and I had you know, Bruce's memoir on in my ear for about 6 months, and I was listening to his story, but also, you know, his voice for a very long time, and then yeah, you know, you do everything you can, and then you just kind of you show up, and you kind of keep your head down, and you try to stay focused, and you try to give it up to Scott and your fellow actors, and you just kind of cross your fingers and pray a little bit, you know, once you show up.
But Jeremy came so prepared, because I had no idea of what kind of preparation he'd done. So I figured, oh man, he's going to ask me 1,000 questions, you know. He asked me 2.
Well, now we need to know. What were those questions?
I don't barely remember them now, but there were just 2, you know, and then his process is very quiet. It's very private, you know. And so on set, you know, he was in the scene and then gone. And, you know, I mean, of course, once I was on the set a little bit, and you could tell that he had completely prepared himself. But he had a very inner and very private process that worked real well.
It's a fragile thing. I mean, you must have felt the same way, right? I mean, having having a film crew and having a young actor. I mean, I felt very fragile, in the process. And did you feel that way, or did you feel like your hands were off the wheel and you were?
We've talked about this before. I kind of felt bad that I was sitting there because I'm going, geez, now does a guy have to go out and act as me? He's got to do it in front of my ass sitting on the chair, And so I wasn't at all of the shoot, but I was at a good deal of it, and I was always a little self-conscious. And I said, Jerry, if there's a day when something needs to be done where I'm going to be in the way, please let me know and I'll disappear, But he was great about it.
No, I mean, I think, there was permission in your presence, and it would have felt strange. I've thought about this a lot now, and it would have felt strange if you were down the road and we were making this thing and you weren't there,
Well, that's nice, man.
It would have felt very strange.
Thank you.
Well, that was my next question is, was there ever a moment when you were on set, Bruce, where they weren't filming and you kind of pulled Jeremy aside and said, I don't do that, or I don't jump like that, or I don't do that with my guitar? Or was there any sort of corrections you needed to make? Or
No.
He knows I would have cried. He couldn't.
No, there was not, I mean, I was sitting next to Scott most of the time, and I had very few suggestions. I might say, gee, the tone was a little different or something like that, But Scott was also extremely prepared, knew his history, knew the situation, and knew his actors. And, I did very little, and occasionally I'd have something small to say, but they really had a lot control of the film.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We've got another audience question. This is Laura Maimoni. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Jim. Hi, Jeremy. Hey, Bruce.
Hey.
This is a moment. My question's for you, Bruce. Looking back at your time through this movie, would you have done anything different, either in your life or in the making or recording of Nebraska?
Well, I couldn't have done anything different because I didn't know how. I didn't know. Once, as I've said before, I didn't know I was making a record when I recorded Nebraska, and then we didn't know what to do with it afterwards, because those were days people were trying to make records that sounded as good as they could, not as offbeat or as strange as they could. So, today it would just come out and be a release, But in 1982, there were no lo-fi records being made, and people were not making records in their bedrooms and releasing them. It seemed like an outrageous idea, which it was to the record company and even to ourselves, But the bottom line was the music was the proof of the pudding, and it was simply the best as it could be on that tape. And as the film shows, we had an incredibly difficult time getting that tape on vinyl because of the way it was recorded. But I couldn't have done anything different because I just simply wouldn't have known how. It was its own organic process, the way it played out, and it was the only way it could have played out.
So you would say it was an artistic statement, or was it more of just what you personally needed to create at that time?
It was just something I did, I was just trying to find songs so I wouldn't go in and spend $1 million in the studio, recording things that we ended up not using. And so the idea was to create some demos that would guide the band, So there really wasn't anything more to it than that.
Yeah.
How attached to, I don't get to ask, what was your sort of expectation, or did you have expectation in the result at that time,
Well, we knew it was not a commercial record, and though we knew it would not get played on the radio, which it did not, it did come out, and the first week it was number 3 and did an immediate dive bomb after that, So it wasn't one of my most popular records when it came out at all. It didn't do that well.
But was that was that disappointing to you?
No, because I don't follow the charts that much. I mean, if John Landau calls me up and says, we're number one, or this is great, it's like I always get a kick out of it.
Yeah.
But I've just made a habit of it. I do the work, I put it out, I let it find its audience, and I'm satisfied with that, So, and I was deeply confident of the music on that tape, and that was all that mattered.
Yeah.
It was a representation of who I wanted to be at that moment and the kind of artist I wanted to be.
All right, guys. Next question is for Jeremy. We were talking about singing Bruce's songs. Which did you have? Which was more challenging, singing the more rockin' songs or the acoustic, slow down stuff?
I mean, none of it was easy, but I'll remember recording Born in the USA for the rest of my life. That song put me on my ass. I lost my voice. I needed a nap. And I saw Bruce shortly after that recording. It was about a week before we started shooting the film, and Bruce had a documentary film, Road Diary, that was out on Hulu, and so they had an event that was nearby, and I saw Bruce after that, and I didn't have any voice. And he said, "What'd you do today?" And I said, "I record Born in the USA." And he said, "Yeah, that sounds about right." And it was a funny thing. We had about a week until we started shooting, and I lost my voice entirely. I just stopped speaking for a couple days, and then my voice started to come back, and I loved the sound of it. I had this real rasp, and I was like, "Oh man, how can I capture this or recapture this?" And so there was a period in that first week, I don't know if I ever told you this, Bruce, where I was waking up in the morning and I was screaming into a pillow to try and recapture like a little bit of that rasp. But I think my neighbors were getting nervous, and I knew that I couldn't go on that way. Maybe I wouldn't be able to continue. So it was only about a week that I did that. But Born in the USA, I mean, I don't know how, Bruce, you performed that song.
That's still a hard song for me to sing. That's the hardest song of the night for me to sing.
Yeah.
And when on that tour, we'd start the show with it, and which was pretty crazy. But even now, it's there's just something about the range of it. And when I got his tape, I was like, wow. He really got close. It was just really effective and completely believable, But it was it's enough to give anybody, as Jeremy once told me, a migraine headache.
Yeah, I did.
It's a really intense scene in the film because you're coming upstairs from the record plant, and then it just cues to you and the E Street Band in the studio, and you're just belting this out. And by the way, this is why you need to see this movie in theaters, because the sound quality, the visual on the screen, you're at a concert, or you're right there in the studio when Bruce was recording that song. It's so awesome. I do, Jeremy, want to take you to another scene in this movie, which to me, I think is one of the most powerful in the entire film. It's towards the end of the film, and you're sitting there, and the camera is just on you. It's on your face. And there's little to no dialogue. And we watch your facial expressions change so slowly. Your eyes, your breathing, you're shaking your head, and you're going through all of these emotions playing Bruce Springsteen in this scene. Yeah. How difficult was that for you to prepare for?
Yeah, that was, there are these scenes in movies or jobs you get, and, you kind of mark your calendar, and then you erase it because you don't want the build-up, and but kind of if you don't get that scene right, then it's possible that the movie won't work or the job won't work. And so I'd given a fair amount of thought. But what was important to me with that scene is just that there was some kind of release, and whatever the release was, was kind of out of my hands. But from the way I understood it, is there was a real tightness, and doubt, and in that release, there's a little bit of acceptance and there's a little bit of peace, granted, I have to imagine. I mean, I've been into therapy before and I've held on to stuff before. It's not obviously the same case as Bruce's, but I know what that's like to be holding on tight to something and then to let it go, and then the kind of relief that follows that, and so I knew the feeling we were after, the feeling that I was after, and that's all I was trying to do, you know.
Yeah, it's an incredible scene, and it's funny as I wasn't on the set for that, and when I saw it, it was just the subtleties of it were just really, really magnificent.
They really were. It's such a very powerful part of the
Yeah.
film, and it's quite intense, as I said.
It's one of the cathartic moments of the picture.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, one of the other things, Bruce, that we learn about in this film, many things we learn in this film, Springsteen, Deliver Me From Nowhere, is about your relationship with John Landau. And how important was it for you that the audience saw that special bond between the two of you?
Well, that was, Scott, the writer and director had just had it in the script, and it was nice that people get a glimpse of the uniqueness of my relationship with John. I know no other musician or no other artist who has a similar relationship with, I hesitate to call John a manager, I read somewhere that he was described as my guardian angel, which in many ways he has been. And so it's lovely that they captured it in the film, and Jeremy Strong is fabulous as John Landau, and the chemistry between Jeremy Strong and Jeremy was just spot on, It's nice for, John's been behind the scenes for 50 years, so it was nice for people to get a glimpse of the way he has actually worked, how much farther than his titles as manager, producer, went, So one of the most essential relationships in my life, and he's somebody I love very dearly.
Yeah, yeah. And you could see that in the film. You can see the love you have for each other. Jeremy Strong, like you said, is amazing as John Landau. And, he's there on the street. You guys are outside the record plant. I'm watching you, Jeremy Allen White, with Jeremy Strong, and I feel as if I am watching John Landau and Bruce Springsteen having this conversation about right after recording with the E Street Band. John says to you, you have enough songs for an album. Was there a moment where you thought, yeah, I do, let's put these other songs away for a while and then we can revisit them?
Well, initially I thought perhaps I had a double album, but then I realized the records were so incredibly different that was really impossible. And I was deeply dedicated to the Nebraska material to the point of simply putting away the rest, which was distressing for a lot of the folks I was working with, because we cut about half of Born in the USA in about 2 or 3 weeks, so it was done very quickly, and we had, as it says in the film, I'm on Fire, Glory Days, Darlington County, Born in the USA. There was really 3/4 of the record almost that we had.
Yeah.
And so when I said that stuff is just not coming out, there was some distress amongst our little group of workers, but I knew exactly what I needed to do at that moment, and so my commitment was complete, and John's job at that time was simply, John Landau is a guy who, we were talking yesterday in another interview, there's a lovely scene where John explains to Al Teller, who was actually a great supporter of mine at Columbia Records, that his job is to simply make sure that this record is released precisely the way that I want it to be. And John, one of the first things he told me when he came to work with me, he says, I am here to help you do what you want to do. And you see that in the film very clearly. You know, he is trying to guide me towards the thing that I want to do at that given moment.
Yeah, and you definitely see that in the film. This is for Bruce, and it's from Kate. Bruce, did you believe going into this that someone could portray your emotional and creative state at the time of Nebraska, or is it such a personal and authentic album?
Well, I'd seen The Bear, so I knew the perimeters of Jeremy's talents, you know, and I related to that character on The Bear very deeply myself. I knew this is a guy that could play the complexities of my own emotional state at that point in my life, you know. And that was the most important thing to me, that I mean, I could see how, just from watching The Bear, how Jeremy worked in interior, you know. And I knew that was the essential, that was going to be the essential issue when it came to, I think, you know, I always think, you know, there's a lot of things you can learn. You know, you can learn to play the guitar a little bit. You can learn to sing a little bit, or as well as Jeremy did, which was terrific. But you can't learn he had just some factor in the way that he moved and presented himself, and the way that the camera read him on film, that had a deep psychological and soulful place that he was coming from. And I knew that was what the picture was going to call for. And so I immediately felt that he was without a doubt the right person to do that, to do the job, you know. So I have to thank Jeremy.
Yeah.
Thank you, buddy, for doing such a great job.
Last question, gentlemen, for both of you. When people walk out of a theater after seeing Springsteen deliver Me From Nowhere, and they go home and they play the Nebraska album, what do you both hope they will feel or hear for the very first time?
Well, I'll say, you know, I think I always knew this about Bruce's music, and Bruce's music is wonderful for many reasons, but the more and more I listened, and as I was preparing to do this film, I understood, you know, one of the biggest things, and why I love his music so much, is there's a wonderful amount of empathy and understanding. I feel understood as a listener to Bruce's music, and so I hope, I don't know, when people go home and they play that record, they feel a little less lonely, certainly, and hopefully more understood, you know.
You know, it's a record that's filled with complex characters with a lot of problems and a lot of issues, and mirrored my state of mind at the time. And I think that certainly after the film, you know, one of the things I'd like people to think is, hey, you don't have to face those problems alone. Yeah. You know, there's ways to get help. There's ways to help yourself, and to depend on your friends and family and professional help if you need it, you know. And so, and also life is a complex and experience, you know. All the characters on Nebraska have you know, they're dealing with their own inadequacies, they're dealing with their own confusion, they're dealing with their own negative sides of their personalities, and they're trying to put a life together. Some of them do, some of them don't, you know. But I think the film will add an extra dimension to the listening of the record when people go home.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, this has been an absolute pleasure. I want to thank you both for being here today.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
At our SiriusXM Town Hall. This Amazing film, Springsteen Delivered Me From Nowhere from 20th Century Studios will be in theaters on October 24th. Once again, thank you, Bruce Springsteen, Jeremy Allen White. I'm Jim Rotolo. Thank you, East Street Nation, for joining us at our SiriusXM Town Hall here on East Street Radio. Thank you.